I got it. Thank you. Thank you. All right, Shabbos, good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Tishrei. To thank Jerry and Sarah Wolaski for dedicating all the Sherman Drushos this month. In the Schusra for their grandsons, Zechariah Dob and Parol Shira. Shani and Avram Kelman in memory of their beloved parents. And the Schusra of all those who need a refuah shalema. Dr. Linda Weinberg in loving memory of her husband, Dr. Paul Weinberg, Paris Moshe ben Avram David, and Leah Solas as chus for her daughter Ilana Bas Esther, and for all those in need of Yeshuas. We'll say, of course, it goes without saying that we dedicate our learning in the chus of all of those injured in the terrible attack over Shmini Atzeres. We dedicate our learning for those neshamas taken from us, that they should have a special place, Tachas Kisi HaKavod, that is reserved for those who are killed al Kiddush Hashem. And of course, we dedicate our learning in the schus of our holy soldiers of the IDF. I have to just tell you as you go on. So I've been in, two of my favorite soldiers happen to be Jeremy's nephews, Ruvi Weissman and Akiva Lassen, who are both called up now. And I've been in WhatsApp contact with them, and it's interesting. They're probably getting ready to say, by the way, like, we're fighting a war, you could stop messaging us now. Like, happy to talk with you. But what's incredible is I've reached them multiple times just saying that, what could we do? And it's overwhelming to see that all they want is our tefillos and is our learning. That's all they want. They're like, we have everything we need. We have everything we need to be successful in this war. We just need your tefillos and your Talmud Torah. And I asked multiple times, because sometimes, people, even if they need something, they don't always say it. I was hoping just something physical, something gashmi that we could give, that we could do. And it was overwhelming, over and over. It's the same answer. Tefillos and Torah. Tefillah, Torah. Or as in fact, as I think I shared this with a different group, as Akiva wrote back, tshuva, tefillah, tzedakah. Tshuva, tefillah, and tzedakah. And I have to tell you that when I got these responses, I said to myself, with an army like this, and with soldiers like this, there is no way that we won't be successful. Mika Amcha Yisrael, who has an army like this, of beautiful young Jewish soldiers, who, when asked what they want, they're not asking for our gashmius, they're asking for our ruchnius. And Chavra, it's an incredible mussar for us, because the truth is, this is the time for us to redouble our efforts. If that's what we're being asked for, then at the end of the day, how could we not deliver on that? How can we not daven with a little bit of extra kavanah? How could we not make sure to keep a sefer tehillim with us, and just a few kapitlach over the course of the day, so that hopefully over the next few weeks, Halavai, this conflict should not go on that long, but finish sefer tehillim. For learning, maybe to make sure that, if we're able to come to Shira on time, or even just like a few moments early, just a commitment. If there are young Jewish soldiers fighting war, which means they're giving up their sleep. So I'm a soldier also. I'm a different kind of soldier. I have a much easier post to occupy, right? I have a much easier mission to do. My mission is just to get up early in the morning and just to show up in the house of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, where the lights are on, there's coffee, the temperature is always good, maybe a little bit cold for some at times, right? But that's my job. So I'm going to be on time for my mission also. Maybe even a little bit earlier for my mission, right? No one shows up late for guard duty, and no one shows up late for their operation. That's our avodah. And when we go ahead and figure out what other things we could take on, small things, little things, but if that's all we're being asked for is our ruchnius, if all we're being asked for is to daven and to learn, then it is an absolute obligation upon us to do so. And if we each contribute, even in just some small additional way, then in Meretz Hashem, we could hopefully contribute something towards the success of these precious soldiers. Chavra, keep them in your tefillos. Again, the list went out yesterday. I have to put the list on the groups of asking people. The incredible thing about Am Yisrael's wars is that everyone knows someone. Everyone knows someone. Sometimes, you think about a war and you ask, do you know anyone who fought in this war? Sometimes the answer is no. You might not know anyone who fought, in Afghanistan, or you might not know anyone who fought, in Iraq or any. But what's incredible about Eretz Yisrael's wars, and especially this war, is everyone knows someone. Everyone knows someone. It's our children. It's our fathers. It's our brothers. It's our sisters. And it behooves us, to the best of our ability, to roll up our sleeves and to do something as well. We cannot go through these days as life as usual. We cannot. Something has changed dramatically for our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael, and something has to change dramatically for us as well. A little bit of extra, push ourselves a little bit more in the realm of tshuva, in the realm of tefillah, in the realm of tzedakah. There are so many good things to give to and so many incredible things to support. We put out the general fund, the central fund from the shul, which in Meretz Hashem we've already begun to allocate. We're going to continue to do so today. The tefillah, the Torah, the tshuva, chevra, we could do our part. We feel helpless being 6,000 miles away, but we're not. We're more powerful. We're more powerful than we ever care to realize. But we just have to be willing to push ourselves a little bit harder to be there for our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael. Halavai neschus of the incredible efforts of our soldiers, the incredible efforts of our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael, and yes, the incredible efforts of diaspora Jewry as well. In Meretz Hashem, Am Yisrael will be successful now, and with Siyata Dishmaya in Meretz Hashem, for all eternity. Amen. All right, we'll say with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today, Baruch Hashem. A lot to do today. Okay, today's daf. Sorry. Today's daf, Meretz Hashem, is Nun Ches. We are beginning in Meretz Hashem at the 2 dots on Nun Zayin Amud Beis, the Chulin Shenishchetu Ba'azara. So if you remember again, the Gemara says as follows. So we'll say, what's Chulin Shenishchetu Ba'azara? If you go ahead and you take a carbon and you shecht it in the precincts of the Beis HaMikdash, you take a non-carbon, non-consecrated animal, shechted in the precincts of the Beis HaMikdash, that is called Chulin Shenishchetu Ba'azara. So that is also, you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to do that. And Halach L'maisa, the Mishnah said, if you did that, you can't be Makadesh a woman with that. So it says, from where do I know this? Where do I know this? Amar B'yochanan Mishra Meir, Amar Torah, this is interesting. Shachot li b'shali, b'shalcha b'shalcha. Kadosh Baruch Hu essentially says, do me a favor. You shecht my animals in my home, and shecht your animals in your home. Right? So the Mashali b'shalcha aser. Just like if you shecht my animal, Kadosh Baruch Hu says, you shecht a carbon in my home. If you shecht my animal, my carbon in your home, it is aser. Af shelcha b'shali aser. So if you shecht your animal, right, in my home, it's aser as well. That's called chulin shenishchetu ba'azara. Shechting my animal, personal use animal, in the home of the Ribbono Shel Olam will be aser. Imashali b'shelcha anush kares. Well, if that's the case, we'll say if you go ahead and you shecht a carbon in an individual home, that is punishable by kares. Af shelcha b'shali anush kares. So would you say that both say same? Would you say that chulin shenishchetu ba'azara is kares? The answer is it's not. In other words, if you shecht an unconsecrated animal in the Beis HaMikdash, it is aser, but it's not kares. Amar Kra, the pasuk said, "V'al Pesach o al Moed lo hiviu lahakriv karban laHashem." V'nichras. So we'll say the pasuk talks about when speaking about shechting a carbon outside of the Beis HaMikdash, that's when it's punishable by kares. So the Gemara says, "Al carbon anush kares, al chulin shenishchetu ba'azara ein anush kares." So if you shecht a carbon in private precincts, in a private home, i.e. outside of the Beis HaMikdash, it is punishable by kares. But if you shecht a chulin animal inside of the Beis HaMikdash, it is not punishable by kares. So we'll say if that's the case, then remember you could ask a birch, you could ask a kash on the comparison. So we'll say maybe there's not a comparison. Remember again, we'll say the Gemara wanted to say, how do you know that chulin shenishchetu ba'azara? How do you know that ultimately again it's aser? So remember again, what was the lashon of the Gemara? The Gemara says just like God. So God says essentially, shecht my animal in my house, and don't shecht my animal, God's animal, karban, in your house, so too, don't shecht your animal, i.e. chulin, in my house. The problem with the comparison is that the punishments are not equal. The punishment for shechting a karban outside of the precincts of the Beis Hamikdash ultimately again is kares, but yet again there is no kares for chulin shenishchatu ba'azara. Rather, Rava says this from here: v'shachatu, v'shachat oso, v'shachat oso. So we'll say there are three extraneous phrases. Ultimately again in this particular context of karbanos. So tlosa krayi siri matam. What are the three extraneous phrases teach us? So the pasuk says this is actually a fascinating pasuk. So we'll say this is interesting. In the desert when we had the Mishkan, if you wanted to eat meat, right? For dinner on a Tuesday night, you wanted to have meat, which of course is interesting because Lamaisa, there was mun. Although even with the mun, it appears that people still did consume other food as well if they wanted to. So if you wanted to eat meat, you had to bring a karban, and then you would get the meat of that karban. There was no such thing as just shechting an animal for private consumption. Every time you shechted an animal in the desert, you had to go ahead and do it in the Beis Hamikdash. So essentially, it would be a shlamim. You'd offer up a shlamim, and then that's how you would get meat. The first time that just shechting a chulin animal without bringing it to the Beis Hamikdash is when we enter into Eretz Yisrael. So we'll say, so the pasuk that the Gemara is quoting over here, it's actually interesting. The pasuk the Gemara is quoting is Kirchak mimcha makom ashev charashom kachal shum shemosham. So when God's home is too far from you, when is God's home too far from you? When you enter into Eretz Yisrael, and not everyone is camped around the Mishkan or camped around the Beis Hamikdash. So suddenly the Beis Hamikdash is at a distance. I will say that's when there's the ability to offer up what we call basar taiva. So basar taiva just means stam. You want to eat meat. Stam, you want to eat meat, you don't have to bring the animal to the Beis Hamikdash. So what says the Gemara says, you're allowed to go ahead and offer up a private animal if you live far away from the Beis Hamikdash, but maybe not if you live close. So we'll say this comes to exclude a chulin animal. That a chulin animal, in other words, a totally once we are in Eretz Yisrael, if you want to offer up a totally chulin animal, i.e., it is not for any type of sacrificial purpose, you offer that up outside of the Beis Hamikdash. I only know this applies to unblemished animals that technically speaking are fit for sacrificial offering. How do you know that it also applies to blemished animals? Marbani is shekain mina machshir. Balim are also included because even though a bal mum itself can't be offered up, it is part of the species that could be offered up. How do you know that it comes to include non-domesticated animals as well? Because the chaya is shechted just like a behema. How do I know that it comes to include birds? Fine. You would have thought that maybe you're not allowed to shecht chulin ba'azara, but if you did so, it should be mutter. So the Gemara says, Talmud Lomar, ki yirchak mimcha hamakom v'zavachta va'achalta. Masha'ata zavech berichu makom ata ochel. That which you offer up outside of the Beis Hamikdash, i.e., chulin offered up outside of the Beis Hamikdash is fit for consumption. But you are not allowed to go ahead and eat chulin that you offer up in a place that is close. So we'll say the place that is close is a reference to the Beis Hamikdash. Prat lechulin shenishchetu la'azara. Ve'im li'ela tamimim. I don't know that applies to Amla Mishnah. I apologize, I'm going quickly through this. So we'll say, but again, just to keep your eye on the ball, remember, we have a statement. What's the statement? You can't be mekadesh a woman with chulin shenishchetu ba'azara. I know that's a real downer, right? You can't, right? So I'll say, so we're just trying to figure out this. How do I know that chulin shenishchetu ba'azara is aser? That's the whole drasha. So the Gemara says, I don't know if this applies 2 unblemished animals that are fit to be offered up. How do I know that it also applies to blemished animals? So the Gemara says, Mar ba'ani bali mumin shekain min hamachshir. Because a bali mumin, Rabbi say, as much as a blemished animal cannot be offered up, it is part of the species that can be offered up. How do I know that it comes to include non-domesticated animals? Mar ba'ani esachaya shi b'shchita ki behema. Because the chaya is subject to shchita just like a behema. Rabbi say 4 lines down from the top, 58a. How do I know that it comes to include birds? Tamalomar v'shachatu, v'shachat also, extraneous phrases. Yochol lo yishchot v'mshachat yashlichan lefnei klavim. So we'll say, now watch this. I would have thought, so fine. So now we have the drasha. So we'll say, just an important Jewish history fact. In the desert, no such thing as shechting an animal just for private use. Anytime you wanted meat, you had to offer a karban, a shlamim. Remember again, and then as a shlamim, you as a Yisrael, I get to eat meat as a result of that. Once we enter into Eretz Yisrael, and now again the Beis Hamikdash is far away, so again at that point, then it becomes permitted to shecht animals outside of the Beis Hamikdash for private use. Not only that, but now we're introduced to a new concept, which is chulin shenishchetu ba'azara. You cannot bring non-consecrated animals for slaughter. And I was about to say, imagine the following: I live in Yerushalayim. Halavai, we should be zocha. I live in Yerushalayim, so I figure, you know what? I'm only having my private animal, but how beautiful would it be if I brought my animal to the Beis Hamikdash to go ahead and shecht it? If you think about it, it really does sound beautiful. It's not a carbon, but again, I just want to bring my private animal to the Beis Hamikdash to be shechted. Sounds beautiful. Only one problem, which is it's biblically prohibited, right? Only a small little detail. That's called chulin shenishchetu ba'azara. So I will say, so now watch this. So now we've established the isser. I would have thought, I would have thought, fine, not allowed to do it, but if I did it, I could give it to my dogs. Now, what does it mean I can give it to my dogs? It's mutar ba'ana. So I might have thought, okay, so now we've established you can't shecht a chulin animal inside of the precincts of the Beis HaMikdash. Good, check. Now I would have thought that if I did it, I could throw it before my dogs, i.e. get hana from it. So the Gemara says, no. Tamalomar, lakelev tashlichun also. Throw before the dogs. That pasuk is talking about what? Is treifa, right? Like treifa, kol treifa also chelun, lakelev tashlichun also. What's a treifa? When the Torah is talking about a treifa, it's really talking about an animal that is killed by a predatory animal. But the truth is, a treifa means any animal that dies without shechita. So if you have an animal that dies without shechita, you can't eat it, but you can get hana from it. How does the Torah express hana? Throw it to the dogs. So the treifa animal you could throw to the dogs. However, we'll say, what can't you do? You can't go ahead and get benefit from chulin shenishchetu ba'azara. So now we've established, we'll say two things. Number one, you can't bring chulin shenishchetu ba'azara. Right? You're not allowed to offer up a mundane animal, a non-sacred animal in the precinct of the Beis Hamikdash. Number one. Number two, obviously you can't eat it. Right? And number three, you can't what? You can't get hana from it. And I both say, to circle back, why are we even learning this? It's because of number three. Because remember again, what did the Mishnah say? I have a great idea, right? I shechted, I did chulin ba'azara. What am I going to do with it? No problem, I'll just use it for Kiddushin. No, you can't. Why? Because you can't get hana from it. Beautiful. So listen, it's Mar Yehuda found Rav Yosef and Roshua Beri de Rabba Bar Bar Chana. They were standing in front of the home of Rabba. Amrluhu, so Mar Yehuda said to them, Tanya, Hamakadesh Rabbetar Chamor Bebasar Bechalav Bechulin Shnishchetu Ba'azara, Rabbi Shimon Omer Mekudeshas, the Chamor Omer Ein Mekudeshas. Wow. So also listen to this. So apparently there's an opinion that says, Rabbi Shimon says, that if you do use chulin shenishchetu ba'azara, ultimately, I'm focusing on that one right now, for Kiddushin, it does work. The Chum say it doesn't work, but Rabbi Shimon says it does work. Amma chulin shenishchetu ba'azara, the Rabbi Shimon lav daraisa. So Mar Yehuda says, what do you see from here? Abba say, what do you see from here? That is according to Rabbi Shimon, chulin shenishchetu ba'azara, ultimately, again, is not asr mid'oraisa. V'haraya, what's the proof to that? You could use it to affect Kiddushin. So the Gemara says, Raminhu, Rabbi Shimon Amar Chulin Shnishchatu Ba'azara Yisrafu. But Rabbi Shimon also said that Chulin Shnishchatu Ba'azara ultimately again should be burnt. V'chin Chaya Shnishchata Ba'azara. So it's right, so Ishtiku. So we'll say, so Yehuda posed this question to these other rabbanim, and they were quiet. They didn't have anything to answer. Also, look at the rabbi. They came up for Rabbah. Amar Lahu Palga Ukmenaichu. So he said to them, Palga, the contentious one, that's how he was referring to Mar Yehuda, right? The contentious one, right? Ukmenaichu has stumped you. Hacham asking, what's the case over here? Shenishchata v'nimtzeis treifa. Rabbi say, what's the case of chulin shenishchatu ba'azara that Rabbi Shimon says that you're allowed to use for Kiddushin? What's the case? It's a case of where he shechted the animal, but it was found to be a treifa. It was found to be a treifa. So I'll say, listen to this. Why? Rabbi Shimon Latamei Desanya Hashochet es hatreifa, V'chein Hashochet v'nimtzes treifa, Zeh v'zeh chulin ba'azara, and Rabbi Shimon maftir b'hana. So I will say, this is a so Rabbi said Rabbi Shimon's position, which by the way we reject. Rabbi Shimon's position is a very specific one. Rabbi Shimon says that if you shecht chulin ba'azara and you find the animal to be a treifa, and I was talking back to yesterday's daf, there are two ways an animal can become a treifa. Right? What are the two ways? Number one, right? Either a precondition, a previous condition, right? The animal has some other condition from which it would have died from within a year, or during shchita itself, right? If let's say you tear one of the simanim instead of cutting it. So I will say, Rabbi Shimon holds that if you shecht chulin ba'azara and the animal either becomes a treifa or was a treifa, it's not asr ba'ana. Why? So we'll say this goes back to yesterday's daf. Rabbi Shimon holds shchita she'ena re'uya lo shmei shchita. He holds that a shchita that is not a proper shchita is not shchita. So therefore, again, he holds that if you shecht chulin ba'azara and it turns out the animal was a treifa, it's never really shchita, and therefore, if it's not shchita, it's not chulin ba'azara. If it's not chulin ba'azara, then what? Then the animal's not aser. Then the animal's not aser ba'ana. We reject that. We reject that position. As you pass like the chamim, ultimately get cham osrim. Okay, fine. I both say bottom line. Takeaway for us. Cannot, right? Chulin shnishchatu ba'azara, right? Number one, it is aser. You're not allowed to do it. The process itself is aser. Number two, it is aser ba'achila. Number three, it is aser ba'ana, and therefore cannot be used for kiddushin. Interesting historical fact, which we emerged from this sugya with. In the desert, there was no such thing as basar taiba, just shechting an animal for private consumption. Anytime you wanted meat, ultimately, you had to bring a carbon and you would eat meat from that. I'll tell you something interesting. Just the Aznaim Torah brings down why is it, if you notice, when Klal Yisrael entered into Eretz Yisrael, so there were two tribes that wanted to settle on the Transjordanian lands, right? Ruvain and Gad. Menashe split later on, but Reuven and Gad. Why did Reuven and Gad want to settle on the Transjordanian? Why did they want to settle in the lands of Sichon and Og? Why? They had a lot of livestock. Asks the Aznaim Torah, why did just Reuven and Gad have a lot of livestock? In other words, like, what's the pshat? Like, everybody left Egypt with the same amount of riches, right? Why did they have flocks that were so much larger than the rest of the tribes? And he says something amazing. Because Reuven and Gad were the only tribes who only ate man during their 40 years. They did not slaughter animals for meat. Isn't that incredible? All they wanted to do was to subsist on the man of the Ribono Shel Olam. And so that's why their flocks were so much bigger than the other tribes, which of course is so ironic because when they asked to sell the lands of Sichon and Og, Moshe Rabbeinu suspects them of what? Right? He suspects, he's scared that they don't want to go into Eretz Yisrael. He thinks it's like Meraglim take two. But Lamaisa, their desire to settle these fertile lands for grazing lands were a result of their overwhelming emunah. All they wanted to do was eat man over the course of 40 years. They didn't want to eat regular food. Why would you take regular food if you have the Ribono Shel Olam's food being given to you every single day? And as a result, such large flocks, they wanted the lands of Sichon and Og. Incredible. Okay, let's go back there. So, Machran, V'Kiddush B'nei Mekudesh. So we'll say, in any of these items in the Mishnah, Right, all of these items that are prohibited for anah. So the Mishnah said, if you take these items and you sell them, ultimately again, and you use the money for Kiddushin, it works. So remember again, if you go back through the list of the Mishnah, Arla, Klaya Kerem, Shar HaNiskal, Egla Rufa, the birds of the Metzora, the hair of the Nazir, Peter Chamar, Basra B'chalav, Chulin Shenishchetu Ba'azara. So you can't be Mekadosh with any of these items. If you took these items, sold them, the monies can be used for Kiddushin, which tells you what? That the prohibited status of the items themselves do not transfer onto the money. Good. So how do I know this? Since the Torah says by avodah zara, vayisachirim kamahu. So avodah zara, the Torah says that if you take avodah zara, you take idolatry, and you sell it, the idolatry status transfers onto the money. Right? So in other words, by idolatry, anything exchanged for idolatry, or anything, right, that is, so ultimately again attains the idolatrous status. Anything about say that comes as a result of idolatry, or anything exchanged for idolatry, anything bought with idolatry, ultimately again has a status of idolatry. I will say now, the fact that Torah goes out of its way to explain this by idolatry indicates to us what? This is a unique din by avodah zara that doesn't apply to other items. So by other items, I will say, if you take a prohibited item and you sell it, the money does not have the prohibited status. I have an elif mina. I will say, why not establish avodah zara as a paradigm? You say that avodah zara is the paradigm. What's the paradigm? The paradigm is anytime you have something prohibited and you sell it, the monies you gain from that transaction are prohibited as well. Mishum dahava avodas kochav mishvies shniksuvana bain kechad. We will say because idolatry and shmita. Because we will say there's another example of shmita. Also, this also applies to shmita, right? That if you sell shmita produce for money or exchange it for something else, the new item takes on Shemitah produce status. Because we'll say, so now we have two examples, Avodah Zarah and Shemitah. We'll say, you've seen this a number of times. Anytime the Torah says the same principle twice, what happens? That's to teach you that these two are exceptions and not a rule. So we'll say, so idolatry we just mentioned. Shvius, from where do we see Shemitah? So listen to this. Mahi, Yovel, Pasuk says, Kodesh Tiyah Lachem. When speaking about the Shemitah produce, the Torah says it's Yovel. Kodesh, it will be Kodesh for you. Ma Kodesh Tofei says Damav. We'll say just like again if you have Kodesh, a consecrated item. So remember again, consecrated status is transferred onto funds. Af Shvius Tofes Damel. So to Shemitah produce, Rabbi saying, ultimately again the sanctity is transferred onto funds. Ma Kodesh Tofes as Damav Yosei L'Chulin. Af Shvius Tofes as Damav Yosei L'Chulin. If that's the case, Rabbi saying, by Kodesh it's true. You could transfer the sanctity of a consecrated item onto money. So the money becomes consecrated. Rabbi say, what happens to the consecrated item? What happens to the consecrated item? It becomes chulin. In other words, that's the whole way. In other words, take Meiser Sheni for example, right? Meiser Sheni is Kodesh. If you redeem your Meiser Sheni with money, so what happens to the money? The money is consecrated. What happens to the produce? Chulin. So maybe I should say the same thing by Shemitah. So therefore the Torah says Tia, Shemitah produce always remains consecrated. So the Gemara says, for example, Ketzad, Lakach Beperos Shvius Basar. So let's say you have Shemitah produce and you exchanged the Shemitah produce for meat. Elu v'elu misparim b'shvius. So we'll say both. So now the produce and the meat both have Shemitah sanctity. Basar b'dagim. Now you exchange that meat for fish. So the Gemara says, Yatsa basar nichnesu dagim. So say, so now the meat no longer has Shemitah sanctity, but the fish does. B'dagim b'yayin. You now exchanged the fish for wine. Yatsu dagim nichnas yayin. Ultimately the fish no longer has the sanctity. The wine does. Yayin b'shemen. You exchange the wine for oil. Yatsu yayin nichnas shemen. So Ketzad. Acharon nitbas b'shvius. We'll say the last item has Kedushas Shvius, Shemitah sanctity, along with the produce itself, uperi atzmo aser. And the fruit itself of the Shemitah produce itself also is aser. So we'll say, here's what we have. We have two examples of items which always retain their status even when exchanged for something else. What are the two items? Shemitah and avodah zarah. So Rabbi said, if you exchange shemitah produce for something or sell shemitah produce for something, the item exchanged or sold for attains shemitah sanctity, but the shemitah produce retains its sanctity as well. Avodah zarah, you have an item of idolatry, so ultimately again the idolatrous item is prohibited, and whatever you exchange or sell that item for also has idolatry status. Now I will say, so now I have two examples of this. What happens whenever you have two examples? Shnei ksuvin habayin ke'echad, ein melamdin. So this is not the rule, rather this is the exception, which tells me that by everything else, what's the halacha? We'll say, if you take a prohibited item and you sell it, what's the halacha? What's the halacha? The money is permitted, right? The money is permitted. The money is permitted. So therefore, again, in all of these cases in the Mishnah, when I have these, so I can't be makadishum with any of these prohibited items, but if I sell them, ultimately, again, the funds are permitted for use. So the Gemara says, so that's fine according to the opinion that says but there is an opinion that says that if that's the case, then avodah zarah and shemitah should maybe come together to form the paradigm. And maybe the paradigm is that every prohibited item not only retains its status, but what? Even when sold, whatever you sell it for, exchange it for, attains that prohibited status as well. So the Gemara says, mi'ute ksive. No, because there are two exclusionary phrases written both by avodah zarah and by shemitah. Ksiv hacha ki cherem hu. Well, so it says by avodah zarah ki cherem hu. That's the emphasis. Who avodah zarah has this ongoing, unchangeable status that is also transferred to anything else. Uksiv hasam, and it says by shemitah yovel he in midi achrin lo. So I'll say, so therefore the Torah goes out of its way to write these exclusionary phrases of who and he by avodah zarah and by shemitah, to teaching that these particular statuses only apply to shemitah and avodah zarah. So therefore, say beautiful sugyas today, and really they come together so nicely. So I'll say, so therefore, the Mishnah goes through the list of items that I can't use for Kiddushin. What's come down there? Why can't I use these items for Kiddushin? The items listed in the Mishnah, because they are all Asr Bahana. Can't get benefit from it. However, if you take any of these prohibited items and you sell them, you could use the proceeds from the sale to go ahead and affect Kiddushin. Why? Because the prohibited status of the items does not transfer onto proceeds from the sale or exchanges, for that matter. If you exchange these prohibited items, there are only two items that exist in halacha where ultimately the prohibited status devolves upon anything that it's sold for or exchanged for. Those two items are avodah zarah and shemitah produce. So you sell avodah zarah, those funds are prohibited. You exchange avodah zarah for something, that item is prohibited. Shemitah, same halacha. Incredible. We'll say new Mishnah. Nun ches amud aleph. Hamikadesh b'trumos u'b'maisros u'matanos. What's the interesting case here? If a man has mekadesh a woman with truma, or with meiser, or matanos. Now both say matanos in these cases, we'll say is a kohen, right? The kohen, when you shecht an animal, gets the zroa, the lechayim, and the keva. Gets the foreleg, the chest, and the stomach of the animal. That's called matnos kuna. Or mechatos, or you go ahead and you're mekadesh on mechatos. So both say this is an interesting case. Mechatas are the waters of the paraduma, or be'efer chatas, or the actual ashes of the paraduma. Harezim mikudeshas. Ultimately, it works. Interesting cases here. Vafilu be Israel, and even if a Jew, right, even if a non-Kohen use these items, ultimately, again, Kiddushin will work. All right. So we'll say so. What would a Yisrael? So let's play this out just very quickly. So imagine I'm a Yisrael. I have truma. Now again, what do I do with my truma? What do I do with my truma? I give it to a Kohen. Rashi says the Havamina in the Mishnah is, so how can I be Mekadesh Woman with Truma? I will say because Truma does have a potential financial value for me as a Yisrael. What's the financial value? It's what's called Tovas Hana. Tovas Hana means, as much as I can't consume Truma, as a Yisrael, what right do I have? I have the right to choose which Kohen, right? I guess so. So Kohanim, be on notice. You guys think you're in control. You're not so in control, right? You have to stay on the good side of us Yisraelim, so that we want to give you truma. I have to give it away, but I can absolutely choose who I give it to. So the Havamina is that right to choose who you give it to has a financial value. Says the Gemara, Amar Ula, Tovas Hana Ilamamar. So Ula says, no, Tovas Hana, the right to choose who to give it to, that doesn't have a financial value attached to it, and therefore, again, you as a Yisrael, I can't be mekadosh woman with truma. So Eisvei Rabbi Abba Laula hamekadosh with truma so ma'israel so mataros mechatas of the efer para harizim mekudeshes afil Yisrael. But the Mishnah says you can. The Mishnah says that I, as a Yisrael, can be mekadosh a woman with truma. Now, I will say, if I'm a mekadosh with truma and I'm a Yisrael, she can't eat it. So what could she do with it? I'm giving her the tovas hana. So now she has the ability to decide which kohen to give it to. So apparently, tovas hana, the right to decide which kohen to give it to, is a financial benefit. Amrali hachabi Yisrael shenaflo tvalim beis avi imo kohen the kasara matnos matanos shelo hormu kemish hormadam, which is actually fascinating. No. You know what the case of Mishnah was? Here's the case of Mishnah. The case of Mishnah is I, as Yisrael, have a maternal grandfather who was a kohen. So let's imagine the following case: I, Yisrael, have a maternal grandfather who is a kohen. My grandfather passed away. In his estate, which his grandson, inherited, is produce. In that produce is truma. Now, he didn't separate out truma, but even Kohanim separate out truma. But say, here's the difference: if you're a Kohen and you separate truma, guess what you can do with it? You can keep it. Right? You have to separate, but you can keep it. So my maternal grandfather, who's a Kohen, passed away. In his estate, essentially is truma that hasn't been separated, but that's part of the produce. So we'll say, what's the halacha? I, his Yisrael grandson, have the ability to keep that truma. So we'll say that's the case of Lushan. Now, I can't eat it, but what can I do with it? I could sell it. Because it's my possession now. So again, I can't consume it, but I absolutely can sell it. We'll say, this is very interesting. As opposed to regular truma, right? I harvest my crop, I have truma. What can I do with that truma? What can I do with it? Right? I have to give it away. I can't sell it. It's not mine to sell. I have to give it away. I could choose who to give it to. The Gemara is suggesting the right to choose who to give it to, that is not a financial right. That doesn't have a value. The case of the Mishnah where it says, I can be mekadeshum with truma, that's a very specific case of where my maternal grandfather, who's a Kohen, died, leaves me produce. In that produce, essentially, is truma. Now, he didn't separate it, but it's in that produce. I could take that truma portion and I could be mekadesh a woman with that portion. Why? Because Rabbi say that's sellable. That you can sell. Oh, it's sellable. Then Allah said that has a value, and therefore I can use it for Kiddushin. Incredible. It's Rabbi say the ability to decide who to give your matnos kahuna to. Is that considered to be a financial value or not? We learned it. But for the Yisrael, the Mishnah says yes. No, we just said, the case of the Mishnah that says that a man, a Yisrael, can be mekadosh a woman with truma is not talking about a typical case of truma where you have your crop and you designated truma and now the right you have is to decide which kohen to give it to. We'll say that's called tovas hana. The right to decide which kohen to give it to, that's a right you have, but that's not called a financial benefit. That doesn't have a financial benefit attached to it. The case of the Mishnah that says that you can be mekadesh a woman with truma, that's a very specific case of where your maternal grandfather, who was a Kohen, died, left behind produce. In that produce is truma. Now you, the Yisrael grandson, I own that truma. Now that I own it, I don't have to give it away. I can sell it. So Amalei, Amad Beis, Amarleis Hotzaat. So he said to him, you're a Hotzah. Now here's what's interesting. So remember again, this is Rabbi Chia bar Abin is asking Rav Huna. So Rav Huna responds to Rabbi Chia bar Abin, you're a Hotzah. Now, Rabbi Chia bar Abin thought it was an insult. He thought being called a Hotzah is a bad thing. Ichsif, he got embarrassed. Who's sever mashma asei kamarle? Amarle hakikam. This is what I meant to say to you. Rabbi Asi the Hutzal kai kavasech. Rabbi Asi from Hutzal agrees with you. What does Rabbi Asi say? So the Gemara says, Nema ketzabosei, because we'll see just a moment. Nema ketanai. So maybe this whole thing of Tavas Hana. So now, just to be clear, the way the Gemara interprets the case of the Mishnah, right? Let's do this quickly. Right? The way the Gemara interprets the case of the Mishnah told me that I, as a Yisrael, could be mekadesh a woman with truma. We automatically assumed that which truma is that talking about? Which truma is it talking about? Which truma? My truma. I'm a farmer. I have produce. I separate out truma. I could be mekadesh with that truma. But what's the financial value in that truma? The financial value is what we call tovas hana, the right to decide which coin to give it to. That's a financial value. So the Gemara says no, that's not the case. The case in the Mishnah where it says that a Yisrael can be chashum with truma is a case of where I have a Kohanic grandfather who died, left behind produce. I inherit his produce. In his produce is truma. I now own that truma, and I can sell that truma. That's the case of where I can be mechal with that truma because that has real financial value. But tovas hana, the right to decide which coin to give it to, that does not have a value attached to it. To which the Gemara says, the whole concept of whether or not tovas hana has a value, that ultimately again is a machlokes tanoim. Here we go. The Gemara says, if you go ahead and you steal the tevel of your friend, you have to pay back the entire amount of the tevel, including the amount of the truma and meiser in the produce. Rabbi Yosef Yehuda says, no, you only have to pay back, interesting, the value of the chulin. We'll say, just clear out this case, right? I steal produce from Ruvain. So now when I go in and I steal it, so I say I stole $1,000 worth of produce. So I go back to Ruvain. So I say, Ruvain, I'm only giving you $800. Why? Because, well, whatever, call it $100. My numbers are going to be off, but just for illustration purposes. $100 was truma. $100 was Meiser Rishon. That didn't belong to you anyway. That belonged to the Kohen of the Levi. Let the Kohen of the Levi come back and claim that from me. I'm not paying you back. So therefore, Rebbe says you have to pay back the whole amount. Rabbi Yosef Yehuda says you only have to pay back the amount of the chulin. What are they arguing about? Demar Savatavasana Mamon, Umar Savatavasana Eina Mamon. I will say, so here's what they're arguing about. What they're arguing about is the truma and meiser in produce, does that have a financial value for the Yisrael or not? One opinion says yes, because even though I don't get to keep it, I get to what? I get to direct it. And the ability to get to direct my truma and meiser to a particular coin and Levi, that has a financial value. Therefore, Ruvain, when you steal that produce from me, you have to pay me back the full value of the produce. That's Rebbe. Rabbi Yosef Yehuda says, I'm sorry, that's Rabbi Yosef Yehuda. No, sorry, that's Rebbe. Rabbi Yosef Yehuda says, no, the Truma Meiser is not yours, and the fact that you have the right to direct it to a particular Kohen or Levi, that's very nice, but that doesn't have financial value. Therefore, Ruvain is only obligated to pay me back the amount of the produce that actually was mine and actually consumable by me. Incredible. To which the Gemara says, "Lo, no, not true. Everyone agrees about say that tovas hana, the ability and the right to choose which coin or levi to give your truma and meiser, that is not a right that has a financial value. So what's going on over here? V'hacha b'tfalim shenafalom beis avi imo coin umatal shlo humu kamisha humu damyon. I will say once going back to the original case. This is a case of where I inherited produce from my Kohanic grandfather. And my Kohanic grandfather, before he died, did not separate out Trumas and Meisos from his produce. So now I inherit this produce. So what's this? Now the shaila is, what's the status of the produce? Mar Savar Kimisha Hormud Damyon. So one opinion says that even in produce, that tithing or tithes have not been separated. Halachically, it's as if they've been separated. Umar Savar Lav Kimisha Hormud Damyon. The other opinion says no. Halacha Lamaisa. Halacha l'maisa, ultimately, again, it's not as if they're separate. I both say, by the way, let's just finish up. The other possibility is, it's as if the tithes have been set aside already, and tovas hana doesn't have financial value. Again, I both say here, we're arguing in the position of Shmuel. So it's interesting. Shmuel holds that halacha l'maisa, when it comes ultimately again to Truma, Shmuel holds that halacha l'maisa, all you need to do is separate out one piece of wheat. And one piece of wheat is enough to satisfy your obligation. Demar islay the Shmuel, one opinion holds of Shmuel. Umar leslay the Shmuel, and the opinion rejects, and that will determine how much you have to pay back. But say first white line, the other possibility is to kuli amal leslay the Shmuel. No one agrees with Shmuel. V'hacha hainu taima derebi the kansinu rabbana laganov. They say, what's going on? Why does Rebbe say that when Ruvain steals tevel from me, he has to pay back the entire amount of the produce? But it's a good chap. Do you hear what's happening over here? Ruvain steals $1,000 from produce, right? Ruvain wants to be about tshuva, so he wants to repay, or he gets caught, one of the two, right? So we'll say now he wants to repay, right? So now Ruvain says, fine, I'll repay you, but I'm not paying you back the value of the truma or meiser. That doesn't belong to you. And by the way, he's saying good, right? In other words, he's right. It doesn't belong. What you begin to see over here is we're going to paskin halacha l'maisa that tovas hana is not mammon. That as much as I have the right to decide which Kohen or Levi gets the truma and meiser, that's not a financial right. So when Reuven says, I'll pay you back the part that I stole from you, which is the part that you could consume. But the Truma and Meiser, let the Kohanim and Leviim come after me for that. Right? Let them go ahead and follow up on that claim. So Rebbe will say, you're right, but it's a penalty. Kansinu Laganov, right? Kansinu Rabban Laganov, right? Rebbe will say we make the thief pay back the entire amount. Why? It's a knas. Even though again the thief is saying good, halachically his statement is actually sound. We're going to make him pay back because it's a knas. Don't steal from people. So both say the Gemara says Vibai. The other possibility is it's clear Amos Shmuel. Everybody holds the Shmuel. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Huda, the Kansura Rabban Balabayis. Listen to this. The other possibility is, in reality, we pass like Shmuel, but yet we penalize the balabayas. Right? How do we penalize the balabayas? Don't leave untithed produce. Right? So only make the ganav pay back the part ultimately again that actually belongs to the balabayas. But now the balabayas is going to have to re-separate out trumas and maisros. That's a penalty for him not to leave untithed produce. Okay. So Gemara says, Tinan, Hamakadish with trumas and maisros, mat omnaso mechatas. So I'm sorry, so let's pause over for just a second. So Rabbi will say, this is the end of that sugya. So halacha l'maisa, so I'll say, so the way we paskin, and this is very important, I as a Yisrael have produce. I can go ahead and separate out trumas and maisah. No, I can. I have an obligation to separate out trumas and maisahs from my produce. But say, what right do I have in those trumas and maisahs? What right do I have? I have the right to choose who I give it to. That is my right. What do we call that right? That's called Tovas Hana. Tovas Hana does not have a financial value. And therefore, if I go and I give my Truma and Meiser to a woman, and I say, Hari'at Mikudesh Asli, but Truma Zu, the Kiddushin is ineffective because I have not given her an item of value. But 1 second, the Mishnah says you can be Mekadesh woman with Truma. What's the case? So I'll say that is a case of where my Kohanic grandfather dies, leaves behind produce. In that produce mixed in there is Truma and Meiser. Now I own that produce. So I'll say that is Truma that I as a Yisrael own. I can't eat it, but I own it. Because I own it, what can I do with it? I could sell it. So if I'm a Kaddish woman with that Truma and Meiser, I'll say then that has a value. That is a value, and ultimately, again, Kiddushin will work. So that's the case of Truma and Meiser. Let's finish up. Tinan, Hamekadish b'Trumos u'Meisos u'Matanos mechatos u'be'efer para harezu mikudeshes v'ava b'Yisrael. That's the Mishnah. Or Minol ask kasha hanotel schar lodon. So we'll say if a person accepts money to be a judge to adjudicate cases, din of betelim. ultimately again his judgments are batal, which Rabbi was saying, because then there's a concern ultimately again of shochad, of bribery. Laha'id, person accepts money to give testimony. Eduso betela, ultimately again, his testimony is batal. Lahazos ulakadesh meimav. We'll say if a person accepts money to go ahead and sprinkle the waters of the paraduma, or to sanctify the waters, meimav meima'ara ve'efer efer makla. We'll say accepting payment. Listen to this: accepting payment to engage in the process of paraduma, ultimately again renders the waters unfit. So we'll say, so what's going on over here? So remember again. So now what's happened? Actually, we'll say, you know what? We'll stop over here for today. Just a few. I'm going to leave you a cliffhanger. I don't want to rush through. Paraduma deserves its due. It doesn't deserve 1 minute. Okay, so we'll say, so in Meretz Hashem, we'll pick up with the case of Paraduma tomorrow. We'll say again, which means Meretz Hashem, we'll finish the parak tomorrow. Meretz Hashem, we'll say tremendous shkach, tremendous daf, tremendous week of Shkayach.